Today, there was a lot of news regarding the demise of CNN's streaming service called CNN Plus. And I think that many people were expecting this, but they weren't expecting it this soon. A lot of people are now comparing this to, for example, the Kim Kardashian marriage to Chris Humphries, if you remember him. They were married for like a couple weeks when Kim Kardashian needed to be married to an NBA player, and then it was over. And I think the implication is that this was never really what it was marketed to be. CNN has sunk so far and so, and with so little dignity that I don't think that there will ever be a way to rebuild a similar network. You have to remember that for people who lived through events like 9/11, or before that, people talk about the Gulf War, following it on CNN was almost the only way to really get round-the-clock coverage because they would just have news coming in all the time. And I think that was the model that was needed in the cable news era, because simply watching the news at 6 o'clock or 6:30, the way that many people had grown up, it was no longer really necessary to keep it so limited, because you could have live coverage all the time. And because of the miracle of cable news, where you don't necessarily need as an antenna signal, or I should say like a TV signal from an antenna. So with cable, you basically have so much access that's enabled to people around the world that CNN was really a trailblazing idea. That's not the same thing as CNN Plus. They've piggybacked off of other communication service ideas that many other people have tried before. And I'm not saying this out of simple, 2020 rear view vision, because it's not as if this channel is something that nobody else does. But you have to take into account that they invested hundreds of millions of dollars in this. It's not like when those of us who put videos on YouTube, we press the record button or we live stream. And generally, and I would say that for a long time this was the case, most of these people wouldn't put in too much of an investment in terms of production value. And that changed over time. There were people who bought microphones, who bought better cameras, and people started to do very skillful videos with GoPros and showing themselves, going on zip lines or mountain climbing and things like that. And that was the value of YouTube, right? But the commentary channels in general don't have that much production value invested in it. And if they do, it's not as if they're breaking the bank and have to dedicate such a large staff to do it. CNN is different. They've always had this high production mentality, and they've generally tried to put a lot of money into the shows that they produce, and then they think that they're going to get appreciation on the part of the audience. But that doesn't really matter anymore. People have started to also abandon CNN for what many of you already know is their political slanting and some of their curating of information based on what corporations and the other media groups and the authorities say, and it's become just intolerable. I think the biggest saga that people remember CNN for in the past year was their feud with Joe Rogan, where they were trying to say that he is eating horse paste and being irresponsible, and he's going to get people killed because he was taking ivermectin treatments for his COVID-19 infection. And I think that the tone-deaf attitude of CNN derived from the fact that they still think that as a network that's on cable news 24 hours a day, where they have people who are coming on and being talking heads and analyzing the news the way it was always done, they thought that people would take it with much more gravitas than a person who is known for ingesting hallucinogenic mushrooms and talking about MMA and doing all sorts of very off-color jokes on the stage. And that was a huge miscalculation. One of the reasons I think it's a miscalculation is because they don't appreciate the other developments that have happened in terms of mixing news and entertainment and news and comedy. It's not as if what happened with Jon Stewart and The Daily Show and similar shows like John Oliver's Last Week Tonight. It's not as if that hasn't affected CNN either. The fact is that people would rather get the news from a network like Comedy Central that makes it sound amusing and puts a humorous bent on it than from a network that constantly tries to scare them like CNN, that tries to make it seem like they're going to die from an invisible virus if they leave the house and take their mask off. And this is without even getting into the polarization in terms of political beliefs that CNN has been one of the big contributors to. We can go through some of these tweets. One of the funniest ones is Brian Stelter talking about streaming now on CNN Plus, reliable sources daily with guests. I don't even know who this is. Robbie Whelan, William Cohan, and Ashley Carmen. So some of these people that he picks as guests, most people wouldn't even know whether those people have anything of value, because one of the reasons that CNN picks their guests is because of, I guess, their professional pedigree. But people who tune into the news don't necessarily, they're not attracted by your titles and your degrees and everything. They are attracted generally by how how informative or entertaining the information that you're giving is. So a lot of these tweets are basically dunking on him for the fact that CNN Plus is now gone, and this was only about, 8 hours ago. So Brian Stelter, on the day that CNN Plus is going the way of the dodo, he puts out a tweet that shows that his own show, I guess, was streaming at the time, and it's one of the last tweets. Somebody says, I think this tweet probably has more impressions than the current viewership of CNN Plus. Tim Young, who is, he's kind of a conservative comedian, if I'm not mistaken. He says, please tell me this is the last program to air on CNN Plus before the announcement it was shutting down. Then Greg Gardner says, hey, Brian, you got scooped on the closing of your own platform. So that's another thing, that CNN Plus was canceled and Vanity Fair was breaking the story, and apparently they forgot to tell Brian Stelter. So that I think is one of the bigger failures in media history. And I was listening to commentators. I was listening to Buck Sexton today saying that this was something that he would have never imagined happening at CNN because he had been on the network years ago, but that after watching how the network had developed from being a news organization when he started there into being just out and out partisan when he left, it's entirely understandable. And there you see that there's plenty of people who are making metaphors about this. People are posting this. Hundreds of millions of dollars were thrown at CNN Plus, and it collapsed in less than a month. One of the best analogies I heard talking about metaphors and comparisons was that CNN Plus has now dethroned New Coke as one of the new brand failures in American corporate history. And I think it's true. When New Coke came out, people were thinking, oh, maybe this will taste better. And it just didn't happen that way. And then they brought back Coke Classic, and it instantly had many more sales. Some people say it might have been one of the more brilliant and more subtle marketing ploys, but this is not going to have the same effect because you're not going to see more people move over to watching CNN. Another thing that happened today, not entirely related, but still interesting, was Spotify apparently dropped an exclusive deal with President Obama and his wife, Michelle Obama. It said the Obamas are searching for a new home for their podcasts after Spotify reportedly declined to offer the former first couple a new contract because they didn't make enough personal appearances on the streaming service. Barack and Michelle Obama are reportedly in talks with several companies, including Amazon's Audible and iHeartMedia, on a deal that will likely be worth tens of millions of dollars, according to Bloomberg News. The ex-president and former first lady who co-owned the production company Higher Ground will reportedly decide on their podcasting platform of choice sometime within the next few weeks. Higher Ground is said to be seeking an arrangement that would allow it to release shows on several platforms simultaneously. So, not to say that I wasn't expecting this podcast to be unsuccessful, but I think there's an explanation for why this might have happened, and Spotify cut them loose. When you have President Clinton, who, as he was president, he was all the time trying to be very magnanimous, and he has this magnetic personality. He goes to crowds and he likes to really interact with them. And you compare him to Barack Obama. I think it's a straight up, very easy comparison. You have one person who's very charismatic and another person who's charismatic for a different reason. Why is it that President Clinton seems to be able to get into these ventures that are they're successful, maybe not for the best reasons, but they're still successful? It's because he has that attitude that he's out there in order to impress people. He's basically a glutton for praise and for friendship. And people have said this about him, that he's one of the nice, in person, he's one of the nicest people. Forget about the things that he's accused of doing, but President Clinton is one of the nicest people and always is trying to lobby people to be on his side. I've also heard this about when he tried to become friends with the Bushes, the elder President Bush and George W. Bush. So President Clinton, it doesn't matter who you are, he'll try to sort of court you and be your friend. And this is one of the reasons that, whether the effect of this was positive or not, he is deemed to be a successful president. He was able, after a horrible midterm disaster in '94, President Clinton actually got the Republicans to bail him out and make sure that he won in 1996 by doing triangulation. What did he do? He went and basically shook hands and got deals done. Deals that probably betrayed his Democratic Party values, but nevertheless guaranteed him re-election. Barack Obama is the opposite. He is somebody who does have a very suave personality and tries to go out there and wow the crowd and make them sort of be attracted to his speech and also his ways of expression, but he doesn't actually try to be their friend. He's always trying to be up there above them on the stage and make this seem to be a very historic and momentous occasion. And I think that, in general, that was one of his biggest failures as president. They both served 8 years. They both got reelected. And when President Clinton left office, I would say America was at a very high point in its history. Not for all the best reasons, but it was economically for certain, and we weren't in any wars. And when Barack Obama left office, we were at a very low point, and Americans were very, I would say, pessimistic about their future, which is one of the reasons that Hillary Clinton lost and Donald Trump won. It was because of the policies of Obama, along with Hillary Clinton, who possesses none of the positive personality quirks that her husband does. So on Spotify, getting back to the point here, Spotify, they need people who are going to produce entertainment value, and that's something that the Obamas are actually not very good at. The Obamas are loved because of their symbolic value. They are the first presidential couple, and certainly they produce this very prestigious aura that they're both very well educated, they're both very well spoken, they're both very eloquent, and they're very clean cut. And this is in contrast to a lot of slovenly politicians, people like Ted Kennedy, who was always drunk, or you have Mitch McConnell, who looks like a turtle. these were people who were very photogenic. But when you actually get down to, are they interesting to listen to? I would say no. And the truth is that this was already tried, the podcast route, in terms of being able to capitalize on this fad. It was tried by Hillary Clinton, and I don't remember anybody really listening to her podcast. She had a podcast that was on iHeartRadio called Me and You Both. And it just seemed like she, it's just like everything else. It's about her making excuses for the fact that she failed at the most crucial moment of her career, winning in 2016. And talking about, I guess, how big of a victim she was because of sexism and the glass ceiling and things like that. In reality, none of these people are victims. They're people who have lived off of the public, the public's money, the public's grace, and they've rode that gravy train their entire careers, both the Clintons and the Obamas. So continuing, it says, one of the sticking points in negotiations with Spotify was the Swedish company's insistence on an exclusive licensing deal. So that's another thing, that they think that their value is so great that they should be able to market their stuff everywhere. Spotify generally doesn't really like that. That's why they had Rogan signed to an exclusive deal. Higher Ground was paid a reported $25 million after signing with Spotify in 2019. So here's a picture of him with President Obama with Bruce Springsteen. The streaming service debuted exclusive content, including the Michelle Obama podcast, as well as Renegades Born in the USA, which the former president co-hosted with Bruce Springsteen. So I think it's very telling that a podcast hosted by Obama and Bruce Springsteen, one of the best-known rock artists in history, didn't really chart anywhere. Nobody really talked about it. And it's because, if you were famous for some other reason and then you got into podcasting, you generally are not successful as a podcaster. I think Joe Rogan is one of the few exceptions. Obviously, he was on Fear Factor. He was a UFC announcer and host, and he was on The Man Show, and he was on all these other things. He's a stand-up comic. But I think that his podcast is an exception. The Obamas are already saturated in the market. You can see them in all of these magazines that they sell in grocery stores. It's not as if people are starved of being able to hear from them. The Obamas were also reported to be frustrated that the exclusivity deal with Spotify was preventing them from reaching wider audiences on more platforms. Spotify has invested around $1 billion on A-list marquee names including Joe Rogan, Prince Harry, and Meghan Markle, and Kim Kardashian. While Rogan has delivered huge audience numbers, his show has generated backlash over interviews with figures who have expressed skepticism about COVID-19 vaccines and pandemic mitigation measures. So that last line, I think, is misleading. The controversy and the backlash is one of the reasons that you want to have Joe Rogan. He's talked about and mentioned so many times a day in relation to this that people go and they listen to his podcast. And that's one of the reasons people would sign up for Spotify. Nobody's going to sign up for Spotify in order to hear some sort of congenial interview between Obama and Bruce Springsteen. People know that they're friends. It's not as if they're talking about anything special. And this is not a real cultural sensation. So, along with that, there was this massive drop this week between, I think, today and I think it started on Tuesday. Netflix stock dropped about 35%. I think it's dropped a little bit more since then. For the second time this year, shares of the streaming company fell sharply after disappointed investors. So, a 35% drop, to put that into context, is something that is worth, I think it's like tens of billions of dollars of worth. They basically, Netflix is hemorrhaging investment. William Ackman, the billionaire investor whose fund bought more than 3 million shares of Netflix in January, said Wednesday that the fund had sold its stake at a loss. In a letter to investors, Mr. Ackman said Netflix would reduce returns at the fund Pershing Square by 4 percentage points. That implies a loss of around $400 million for those investors. In January, Mr. Ackman said Netflix sported an attractive valuation. On Wednesday, he wrote, "We have lost confidence in our ability to predict the company's future prospects." The shares shed more than a third of their value, finishing down $122.42 to $226.19. The stock was the S&P 500's worst performer of the day. Investors had expected that the company would add new users in the quarter. Instead, Netflix said it ended the first 3 months of the year with 200,000 fewer subscribers than it had in the fourth quarter, and said it expected to lose 2 million global subscribers in the current quarter. Several other streaming stocks fell Wednesday. Paramount Global finished down $3.12. Warner Brothers Discovery was off $1.48. Walt Disney retreated $7.33. So this is not an isolated incident. And I think that there's a realization here that while streaming services afford the user a lot of flexibility, they can everything's on demand and you can just pick up and watch it whenever you want. You have to pay for different services for every little type of entertainment that you're trying to get. So it isn't nearly the novelty that they were hoping it would be, and people are walking away from it. So another issue that I wanted to bring up here is that I think talking about CNN again, talking about news reporting, we're talking about a format that they've been trying to capitalize a lot on terrible events that are happening overseas. Now, when the Russian invasion of Ukraine started, I was basically recording videos every couple of days and trying to give my impression. Now, to tell you, I'm not going to give a full analysis here. My impression is that obviously the Russians believed that they would overwhelm the Ukrainians within a few weeks and that the war would be over by now. And I think that they failed. And I think that in terms of cable news, they were hoping that this would be something that would resurrect them after the Trump era when they don't really have anything to replace that. And instead, because the war is sort of plodded along and it's ground to a halt, instead of that, you're seeing that people sort of stop paying attention. And yes, there are things that are terrible that the Russians have done or also may have done. We don't know precisely which things they're guilty of and which things may have been, exaggerations. But people are saying that there are civilians still trapped within Mariupol, and some people are saying 100,000 civilians still trapped in Ukraine's war. So the situation is this. Mariupol is the city on the Azov Sea where the Russians have besieged a large Ukrainian force for several weeks, and it's basically fallen to the Russians apart from a large steel plant and complex. I don't have much belief that it's 100,000 civilians trapped in this steel complex, but the problem is that they always issue these updates about what's going on, and there's statistics here that they're of very questionable veracity. And then people, they read about them and they don't know whether to trust what the media is saying or not. Then there's all the censorship that goes with that, and how much the media is telling you that don't believe the Russian disinformation about this. You have to sort of take this from reliable sources like us. This is one of the reasons I think that the media has failed. This is definitely a tragic situation. I feel for the people that are, they've had their lives destroyed, or they've lost their lives. Mariupol, which is apparently a very historic city, it has significance to both Ukraine, Russia, and also to the Greek minority there, virtually destroyed. But this is something that the media will move on from inevitably, and then they're going to talk about in the future. They're going to invoke this when they want to, when they want to talk about how brutal Vladimir Putin is. Unfortunately, though, the media has never really gotten a handle on prescribing solutions as opposed to just building outrage, right? So when a problem presents itself, like the Russian invasion of Ukraine, is the answer always to gin up public outrage over what's going on? Or is it to say to the leaders of the free world, people like President Biden and the White House, say to them, hey, you have to be careful about what's going on here. We want to avoid outcomes that are tragic from happening. And granted, the media is limited in its ability to do that, but from what I've been seeing, they've been ginning up the outrage in order to beat the drum towards war. Now, let's not be mistaken here. Russia attacked Ukraine. It wasn't the other way around. But so much effort has been put in to getting Americans to support a larger effort in Ukraine. There's a story that's been going around about Malcolm Nance, and he is now in Ukraine. And I don't know why there's not that many stories here, but so Malcolm Nance apparently he has said Michael Flynn literally ate Putin's bread. So former National Security Advisor Michael Flynn and Malcolm Nance, an intelligence analyst who has frequently appeared on MSNBC, have traded biting public comments over Nance's decision to join Ukraine's Foreign Legion and fight in the war against Russia. The exchange began when Flynn criticized Nance during an interview on Lindell TV on Tuesday, an online network founded by MyPillow CEO Mike Lindell. Flynn, who was pardoned by Trump after pleading guilty to lying to the FBI about his contacts with the Russian ambassador, was asked for his opinion regarding Nance's decision to join the conflict in Ukraine. Is he fighting for a fascist dictator, or is he fighting for communism? Whose side is he on here? Flynn answered, is he supposed to be a journalist that's reporting the news, or is he out there trying to make the news? What kind of ploy is that? Flynn's remarks elicited an angry response from Nance. PSA, tell Mike Flynn that I fight for democracy. Flynn literally ate Putin's bread seated at his right hand. He loved Moscow's cash and spent years nestled deeply in Vlad's cold, white KGB ass. Nance tweeted, now he supports Russia's murder of a free people. F you, Mike Flynn. F you. Nance later followed up on his original post by writing, oh, did I mention convicted felon? I forgot. The truth of the matter is that no, Michael Flynn. So this is one of the problems that you have, and this isn't CNN necessarily, but CNN recently interviewed him. Malcolm Nance has been on MSNBC for several years and constantly predicting that former FBI Director Mueller would convict Donald Trump. That didn't happen. That he would blow open this massive Russian conspiracy. That didn't happen. Constantly talking about how the national security agencies are going, the NSA and other security agencies like the CIA, they're going to get the proof that Trump was a Putin puppet the entire time, and that he was, the whole time he was on the Kremlin's take, and then it never happened. And the reason it never happened was because the underlying accusation was false. They're never, or at least unprovable, right? In order to prove that somebody is guilty of collusion with another country, you have to show that they actually, they communicated in either an explicit fashion or a coded fashion. They could never prove either of those. I think Michael Flynn has done a lot to damage his reputation since then too, because he seems to latch on to all these ideas for how to reverse the 2020 election. That can't happen, whatever you want to say. Is he fight? So Malcolm Nance, though, I think takes it to a whole new level. This is a person who, yes, he says he's volunteered to fight in Ukraine, but from what I understand, Malcolm Nance is not actually in the Donbass region. I believe that Malcolm Nance is in the area that's close to Poland, which is less. It's less of a hazardous area. So And then he's talking about all this aid that they've thrown in there. So the problem with this is that he's been reported to have joined the fight to attack to sort of fend off the Russian attack on eastern Ukraine. And the fact is that they're using these analogies here, and they're saying, "Oh well, if anyone asks you how Russia's war in Ukraine is going, well, this comparison of the situation a month ago and today is pretty telling." So this one is from March 22nd, and and they put the wrong March 22nd, and then the second one is from April 21st. Now this is sort of ignoring the important context here, and this is what Nance puts out. There's an MSNBC contributor. The Russians basically their main goal is this region where my cursor is. It's this whole area to the southeast, and everything up in the north. While obviously they would probably they probably did try to seize it, that wasn't their main target. They wanted to win and force the Ukrainians to basically accept demilitarization. So you have the Biden administration dumping all of this money into Ukraine, $800 million at the last notice. I think it might have even gone up, but I'm not quite sure. So the Ukrainians are basically accepting the help from this guy who was a media stooge for the past few years, somebody who spread open lies and misinformation about what happened in terms of the Trump-Russia scandal. And that's the type of media that we've gotten used to the past few years. So I guess my main message here is that the reason that CNN Plus has failed, the reason that you have Spotify cutting ties with the Obamas is because they're starting to realize that yes, you can have entertainment and you can have news and you can mix them. But when they become so lacking in credibility, when you have people who are constantly repeating lies and are just overexposed and saturated on the airwaves, when you have all those factors going into it, then you're not going to have people log in and try, or subscribe and pay money to see it. It's basically a sunk cost. So that's about it for today. And I personally, I am going to also gloat over the fall of CNN Plus. But please like, share, and subscribe. I also want you to comment below because unlike CNN, I allow you to comment freely. And you can also follow me on Odyssey, Rumble, BitChute, YouTube, Podbean, Gab, Mind, Substack, Telegram, and Getter. See all the links below, and you have the screen names on the screen right now. Have a great day. Peace.